a mega project in which more than 150 countries of the world participated, where promises were made to build new airports, motorways, and seaports, where dreams were shown of creating future Dubai and Singapores. But today, in these very countries, these mega projects appear incomplete and shattered dreams. Some are buried under the weight of debt, while others present the scene of ruins. This was China's biggest global megaproject, named the Belt and Road Initiative. At one time, everyone called it the project of the century, but today it is called a geopolitical disaster, and the greatest loss has been borne by the poor countries to whom these beautiful dreams were shown. But what exactly happened that today people are pointing fingers, even at a superpower like China? Welcome once again to Global TV's videos. In 2013, when China's President Xi Jinping announced the Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI for short, it was called the biggest plan of the century. Its purpose was to create a new Silk Road, through which Asia, Africa, and Europe would be connected by railway lines, highways, and ports. China's mission was to bring poor countries onto the path of development and to present China as a global leader. China's vision shocked the world. More than 140 countries expressed interest in this plan, and many poor countries immediately started taking loans from China. In no time, China invested $1.2 trillion in this project. But this money was given to those countries in the form of loans, countries to whom Western banks or the IMF had refused loans, considering them too risky. Soon, however, the true face of the BRI began to appear. It was not just an infrastructure project, but rather China's geopolitical and economic agenda. The truth was that China's industrial capacity had increased far too much. Every year, millions of engineers were graduating, but it was difficult to adjust them into jobs within China. That is when China made a plan to export them and to expand its geopolitical power. The plan was that poor countries would be given loans for BRI projects, and on those projects, China's own industrial capacity would be used, giving benefit to its own people. The biggest issue of BRI is debt trap diplomacy. That is, China gave such huge loans to poor countries that they could never repay them, and in return, they would be forced to hand over their land or important infrastructure to China. The biggest example of this is Sri Lanka. The leaders of Sri Lanka were shown dreams that if they built a new port on the Indian Ocean, they could become a regional trade hub like Dubai. The issue was that Sri Lanka already had the Colombo port, but that port was mainly a transshipment hub where containers were transferred from large vessels to smaller ships. China tempted Sri Lanka with the idea of building a new deep port on the busy shipping route between the Malacca Strait and the Suez Canal, which would be named the Hambantota Port. When Sri Lanka decided to take a $1.3 billion loan from China, China gradually put forward its conditions. The condition was that only Chinese firms would construct this port. The interest rates were low, but if the loan was not repaid, China had the power to take control of the project. Construction was completed, but Hambantota Port never succeeded. Feasibility studies showed that, in reality, there was no need for a port there. The situation was such that in the whole year, only 30 to 40 ships stopped there. Now, since the port was not functioning, repayment of the loan also became a problem. Things reached the point where in 2017, under an agreement, Sri Lanka had to hand over the port to a Chinese company for 99 years. Now, all the revenue of that port goes only to China, and Sri Lanka has, in a way, lost a part of its sovereignty. But Sri Lanka was not the only country to fall into this trap. The small African country Zambia, which survives mainly on copper exports, also fell into this trap. Its leaders dreamed of modernizing the economy and started many projects with Chinese loans. They were given the narrative that the conditions of IMF and Western loans were too tough, but they never considered the downside of Chinese loan conditions. Those conditions stated that if the loan was not repaid, China would seize their assets. But the price of these dreams was huge. By 2020, 43% of Zambia's total debt was owed solely to China. And in November 2020, when due to the COVID-19 pandemic, trade and tourism collapsed and the demand for copper dropped, Zambia defaulted. The BRI also created many projects that were of no real use. These are called white elephant projects, that is, projects which look big and grand but have no practical benefit. Montenegro, a small European country, in 2014, took a $1 billion loan from China. The purpose of this loan was to build the Bar-Bulgari Highway. But the planning of this project was so poor that after cutting through mountains and beginning construction, the money ran out on just a small section. Now, there is only a 41-kilometer road which leads to nowhere. So much money was spent on this small section that the entire economy of the country was shaken. Now Montenegro's debt has crossed 80% of its GDP, and they are forced to seek help from the IMF and European Union. Sri Lanka, near Hambantota Port, also built an airport hoping for some development in the area. The Matala Rajapaksa International Airport was built at a cost of $200 million, and that money too was borrowed from China, but neither airlines showed interest, nor did passengers come. Today, this airport is called the world's emptiest airport because flights are very few, so much so that sometimes elephants and animals can be seen roaming on its runway. On the west coast of South America lies a small country called Ecuador, and it too was caught in the trap of BRI. They tried to solve their energy crisis by collaborating with China to build a $2.6 billion dam called Coca-Codo-Sinclair. But during construction, Chinese contractors ignored quality standards, and later it was revealed that officials were bribed to let things pass. As a result, today the dam's walls have more than 17,000 cracks. Now this project is at risk of collapse at any time, which would not only be an economic disaster, but also a massive human and environmental crisis. After that came Pakistan's turn. CPEC, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, was a $60 billion plan for Pakistan. Pakistan expected electricity, jobs, and development from CPEC, but most projects were delayed or failed. People of Gwadar protested against lack of water, electricity, and the Chinese government. The promises of jobs were not fulfilled, and Pakistan's debt burden kept increasing. Now the situation is such that Gwadar Port, which earlier was under Pakistan's authority, is now in China's hands. 91% of its revenue is taken by China, while only 9% remains with Pakistan. The biggest shock to BRI came when the only G7 country, Italy, which had joined it, announced its exit. China had not given Italy direct cash loans, but rather signed MOUs, Memorandums of Understanding, which promised Chinese investment and trade deals. But most projects did not materialize, and Italy gained very little economic benefit. Therefore, later Italy called it a big mistake and withdrew from BRI. Apart from Italy, countries like Malaysia, Myanmar, Bangladesh, and Nepal also canceled or renegotiated some of their Belt and Road Initiative projects. Seeing this failure, the US and Europe also launched their own alternatives. For example, PGII, Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment, and Europe's Global Gateway Program. These plans promise transparent and low-interest loans so that countries can avoid China's debt traps. But as a result, China's ties with Russia have strengthened. After Russia felt isolated due to its war against Ukraine, it tried to get closer to China through BRI. This is creating a new geopolitical axis, which could become a challenge to American dominance. After 10 years and spending trillions of dollars, the Belt and Road Initiative is now considered one of modern history's biggest foreign policy failures. The biggest reason for this failure was that BRI was never meant for development, but rather for China's own interests. China wanted to export its extra industrial capacity, gain access to raw materials, and increase its geopolitical power. At the same time, most of the loans China gave were in Chinese yuan, because China also wanted to promote its currency. Today, the Belt and Road Initiative stands at a new turning point. China is rebranding it as BRI 2.0, with more focus on digital infrastructure, green energy, and sustainable projects. But the world is no longer ready to believe in promises as before. Now countries will only accept those projects which bring real economic benefits, not just an increase in debt burdens. The question is, while other countries suffered so much from BRI, did China itself gain anything or not? In reality, China did not achieve exactly what it wanted. China wanted to increase its control over the world, but instead, because of BRI, it was labeled as practicing debt trap diplomacy. Because of BRI, even China's own economy slowed down. Billions upon billions of dollars in loans to recover, and the responsibility of running the projects it seized, have now become a liability on China. On the other hand, through BRI, China has taken direct or indirect stakes in more than 100 ports worldwide, which is very beneficial for China's export economy. If the entire BRI network is completed, it will be the longest road-rail sea connection from Asia to Europe, covering 65% of the world's population. We hope you will also like and share this global TV video in abundance. Thank you very much for your loving comments. See you in the next wonderful video.